All right, today we're diving into something pretty wild. It's a raw, first-person account from an anesthesiologist who decided to turn his professional tools on himself. His goal? To use the power of anesthesia to literally deconstruct the very machinery of consciousness. A truly dangerous experiment.
And right out of the gate, he gives this incredibly stark warning. Let's be clear, this is not a how-to guide. It's more like a diagnostic history of a huge mistake. He makes it crystal clear that what he did was a disaster, a massive cautionary tale against using chemical shortcuts to find what others seek through discipline.
You can almost think of his journey in these old alchemical terms. He started from a place called nigredo, a state of darkness, confusion, what he called a personal collapse of meaning. And from that dark place, driven by a pretty reckless curiosity, he tried to get to albedo, or purification. But instead of careful, patient work, he basically just reached for a chemical hammer.
So let's get into the experiment itself. And, this wasn't just a one-time thing. It started out kind of casually, and then, as he puts it, devolved into a systematic obsession. This right here gets to a core distinction that, as a specialist, he already knew intellectually. There are two kinds of silence. There's the silence of a purified mind, the kind you achieve through disciplined practice. And then there's the silence of an anesthetized mind, which is just induced by chemical suppression. He understood this difference perfectly, but he chose to ignore it, chasing that raw, experiential shortcut.
And this quote from Jung really frames the fundamental error of the whole thing. See, the author was trying to look inside to awaken, but he was using a tool that doesn't clarify your vision. It completely shatters the lens.
So how did this deconstruction actually work? What does anesthesia really do to the mind? Well, it's not about expansion. It's about taking consciousness apart, piece by painful piece.
The key mechanism he identifies is something he calls integrative failure. See, our normal consciousness is this incredible synthetic process. Your brain is constantly stitching together sight, sound, and your sense of self into one seamless reality. Anesthetics work by just breaking that process. They dismantle the very glue that holds our world together. And he witnessed this firsthand. First, his vision would completely detach from what he was hearing. Then his sense of where his body was in space would just float away. He could actually feel the lag as his brain failed to sync everything up. He wasn't seeing some higher reality. He was just watching the mechanical failure of his own perception.
But as the experiments went deeper, something else started to surface. Something way more primal than just sensory fragmentation. He called it the Minotaur.
Now, this wasn't some mythic creature from a story. No, this was his own raw biological survival drive. When the anesthetic knocked his rational, civilized neocortex offline, the older, more primitive parts of his brain just took over. What was left was pure, unfiltered aggression and fear, the animal nature that lies beneath all our civilized masks.
This quote from Seneca just feels so perfect here. The author had to learn, with this grim discipline, how to observe this intense internal fear and aggression without actually becoming it. He was facing the raw terror of his own biological machinery, a kind of suffering born not from reality, but from an imagination supercharged by chemicals.
And this brings us to the central lesson of this entire harrowing journey. It's so important. Just because you break something doesn't mean you understand it. Disruption is not the same thing as insight.
This table just lays out the difference so clearly. Chemical disruption, on the one hand, works by suppressing your brain's functions. The result? Fragmented perception, disorientation, weakness. True clarification, on the other hand, comes from removing obstructions, and that creates stable perception, resilience, and real insight. They are polar opposites.
So where did all this lead? I mean, what was the end game?
Well, the author pushed his experiment to the absolute limit. He was trying to chemically force a breakthrough, to precipitate some kind of spiritual threshold. He describes navigating these 7 distinct layers of intense internal resistance. He finally pierces the last one, expecting some grand climax, some explosion of light or profound cosmic understanding. So, what did he find at the center of this chemical labyrinth?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. A sheer, almost boring normality. The tension just collapsed. There was no angel, no great secret of the universe, just a stark, unremarkable silence, and the absence of the self he'd been chasing so hard.
And this table here explains exactly why it was a counterfeit awakening.
The entry was forced through suppression. The nothing he found wasn't peace, it was just numbness, dissociation. And, this is crucial, it was impossible to integrate. It wasn't a real change in perspective, it was just the memory of a traumatizing experience.
So what's the final diagnosis? Well, the insight he gained was actually a valid one. The self is a construct, but the cost was immense. It left him with a destabilized mind that took him years to repair. And the ultimate lesson? He didn't actually sever the chains of the self. He just chemically bypassed them for a moment. They were still right there when the drug wore off.
And that leaves us with a pretty critical question to ask ourselves. In our own lives, in our own search for growth or understanding, are we ever mistaking the sheer intensity of an experience for its truthfulness? Because as this whole dangerous experience shows, a powerful disruption can feel really, really profound in the moment. But true insight, that brings clarity, stability, and resilience, not a chemical hangover.
You know, we talk about changing our minds all the time, but what if it meant something way deeper? Not just swapping one opinion for another, but fundamentally shifting the very foundation of who you think you are. Well, today we're diving into a powerful concept that points to exactly that. It's called metanoia. And this. Wow. Know thyself, and thou shalt know the universe and the gods. I mean, this ancient wisdom really sets the stage, doesn't it? It's this massive challenge that's been thrown down for thousands of years. And the concept we're exploring today, it gives us a really specific, really interesting way to approach that challenge. All right, so let's get into it. What exactly is metanoia? You might have heard the term in psychology, where it usually means, a big shift in how you see things. But its original meaning? Oh, it's way more profound than that. Let's break the word down. Meta means beyond, and nous means mind. So right away, you can see we're not just talking about changing what's in your mind. We're talking about going beyond the mind itself. This is a huge idea. It's a structural event, a shift in the very place you think you are. Just let that sink in for a second. This isn't about switching from one belief to another. No, this is about completely suspending your identification with all of it. The thoughts, the feelings, the sensations, everything that just flickers through your consciousness. It's a genuinely radical proposition. Okay, so to really get our heads around this, let's explore this classic idea, the ghost in the machine. Right? You've got your brain, this incredibly complex biological machine, and then there's your consciousness, the ghost that seems to be running it. Where does that actually come from? So here's the puzzle. If the machine, the brain, gets corrupted or damaged, what happens to the ghost? I mean, common sense and a lot of science would tell you that consciousness should get corrupted right along with it. It should fall apart or even disappear. But that's not what happened in the experience we're looking at. And this is where it gets really strange. As perception started to warp and logic just completely failed, something else remained. A kind of witnessing capacity that was just there, watching all of the chaos. And here's the key part. It was totally separate from the mess. It was untouched by the machine's breakdown. So this bizarre experience forces us to draw a really important line in the sand. On one side, you've got the contents of your experience, all the thoughts, sounds, and sights, but on the other side, you have the simple capacity that registers all of it. And what this suggests is that they are two very, very different things. And you know what? This isn't some brand new idea. There's an ancient Buddhist parable that has this brilliant metaphor to help us get it. It comes from the Sharingama Sutra. So the story goes like this. There's an aging king, and he's pretty bummed out. He's looking at his reflection, seeing the wrinkles, feeling his vitality fade, the stuff we all dread. He's lamenting this to the Buddha. And this is where the Buddha just flips the whole thing on its head. He asked the king a simple question. Has your capacity to see gotten old and wrinkled along with your face? And the king thinks about it, and of course not. The seeing itself, the raw capacity to see, is exactly the same as it was when he was a little boy. And that is the core metaphor right there. Our awareness is like a mirror. It can reflect a young face, an old face, a happy mood, a sad mood, a clear thought, a confused thought. But the mirror itself doesn't become any of those things. It just reflects whatever is in front of it and remains unchanged. Okay, so now that we have that powerful mirror metaphor, let's break this down a little more cleanly. Let's really look at the difference between the reflection and the mirror. So look at this. On one side, you've got the mental contents, the reflection. It's always changing, right? Transient. It's vulnerable to damage, to age. And this is what we usually think of as me. But then you have the witnessing capacity, the mirror. It's stable. It's just pure noticing. It seems invulnerable to whatever is happening in the reflection. And the funny thing is, it's always there, but we almost never notice it. Okay, this next point is absolutely crucial, so let's be super clear. When we talk about this unchanging witness, we're making a structural observation about how the mind appears to work. This is not some kind of proof of an eternal soul or a religious claim. It's a functional description of something you can observe for yourself right now. Now, whenever people first bump into this idea of the witness, it's super easy to fall into a few common traps. So let's go through them just so we can sidestep them ourselves. So, trap number 1, thinking the witness is a soul. We just covered that. It's a mental function, not a theological proof. Trap number 2, turning the witness into a new identity, a true self that you can use to escape from pain. Nope. It's a standpoint for inquiry, not a place for the ego to hide. And then there's trap number 3, and this one is really subtle. It's confusing the actual silent act of watching with the thought, I am watching. See the difference? That thought is just another reflection. The real watching is happening before the thought about it even arises. Which brings us to the whole point of this, really. The most practical takeaway. This witnessing capacity isn't some shiny trophy to put on a shelf. It's a tool. It's something you can actively use. And here's a really simple way to try this out. It's called the mirror drill. First, just sit for a few minutes and imagine your awareness is a big, polished mirror. Step 2, just let stuff happen. A sound, a thought, whatever. Just see it as a reflection. Step 3, notice how the mirror doesn't grab onto the reflection. When the sound is gone, the mirror is empty again. And that's the final crucial step. Practice identifying with the mirror itself, not the fleeting reflections. And this quote really nails it. The observer is a tool, not a rank. It's not about becoming some special, enlightened person. It's just a functional shift in perspective, a new place to stand so you can investigate your own mind with a bit more clarity. So, I want to leave you with a little challenge, something to play with in your own investigation. It's this. Can you actually catch that split-second moment where the silent act of watching gets co-opted and turns into the thought, I am watching? Can you spot that tiny, subtle shift? Because if you can catch that moment, well, you're seeing the whole game in action.
All right, let's dive in. Today, we're talking about a really fascinating idea. This concept that our lives move in cycles, constantly bringing us back to the exact lessons we most need to learn.
There's this really profound idea that life, it just doesn't let you skip a lesson. It's like there's this weird gravity to it, always pulling us back to the things we haven't quite figured out yet. It just keeps happening, over and over, until we finally see what we've been trying so hard to avoid.
Does that sound familiar at all? I mean, it's that classic Groundhog Day feeling, right? Where you're facing the same challenge, the same old frustration, but maybe it's just wearing a different disguise this time. You make this big, bold resolution, and then, poof, a few months later, you're somehow right back where you started. How does that happen?
But here's a thought. What if this whole loop thing, what if it isn't a bug in the system? What if it's actually a feature? The idea here is that this isn't some kind of punishment for failing. No, it's actually a core part of how we're supposed to grow. We keep circling back to these same old struggles so we can finally learn how to deal with them with our eyes wide open.
Okay, so let's get into our first section here. It's called Crisis as a Primer, and it really explores this powerful, kind of counterintuitive idea, how hitting rock bottom can actually be the very thing that prepares us for a major breakthrough.
Now look, this is not about romanticizing suffering at all. It's more like a diagnosis of how change really works. Think about it. An intense crisis can act like a sledgehammer to all those rigid, stuck parts of our personality. It just cracks them right open, and that creates the space for something new to actually grow.
So in Buddhist psychology, one of the biggest things holding us back is called the first fetter. And a fetter is just, like a shackle. This first one is the core belief that we have this solid, continuous, unchanging self. We get so attached to this idea that this is who I am, and that's what makes us so rigid and so resistant to any real change.
And, an experience like addiction can just completely shatter that illusion. The source material points out that a totally different personality can emerge. A fiend identity, it's called. Aggressive, deceitful, desperate.
something that feels completely alien to the person you thought you were. And yeah, that's terrifying. But it's also a crucial realization. Our self is not this solid, fixed thing. It's fluid. It's conditional.
Okay, so the second big obstacle is this idea that if we just, follow the rules, if we do what society expects and go through the right motions, we'll automatically be okay. We'll be saved or rewarded. But a crisis has a way of showing us just how flimsy that is. Institutions can fail us, the rules can feel totally hollow, and you're left with this stark realization that just playing by the book is absolutely not enough to get you through the really deep challenges of life. So this is the really crucial point. A crisis can prime the mind for change. It can weaken all those old assumptions and show you where you're vulnerable. But, and this is a big but, being primed does not mean you're close to the finish line. Not at all. That exposure, it just opens a door. It's the sustained, conscious work that actually walks you through it.
So, if a crisis just opens the door, then what does walking through it actually look like? Well, this is where we get a really practical map. It's a predictable 5-phase cycle that can help us understand and navigate these patterns of change.
So here's the whole cycle in a nutshell. It starts with this powerful moment of resolve. Then, that energy kind of fades into a subtle drift back toward old habits. That drift leads to a phase of numbing and then an inevitable collapse. But paradoxically, that collapse is what sets the stage for a brand new and much humbler recommitment. And this is what it actually feels like from the inside, right? We start at this peak of insight and clarity, thinking, I finally get it, I will never go back. But then comes that quiet whisper of the drift. Just this once won't hurt. And maybe the most telling phase is numbing. That's when the old habits just don't even work anymore. They don't satisfy, and we're left feeling empty. Why do I feel nothing? This leads to collapse, where it feels like I'm just broken, this is impossible. But it's right there, from that feeling of being broken, that we find the strength to return, only this time with way less pride and a whole lot more humility.
Okay, so as we're trying to navigate this whole cycle, there is a major pitfall we have to watch out for. It's called the anesthetic trap. And honestly, it's a critical warning for anyone who's trying to do this kind of work.
This brings us to a really, really important distinction in how we use our practices like meditation. You can use it in two totally different ways. The first way is like an analgesic, a painkiller. You're just trying to suppress the unpleasant feelings, retreat into a little bubble of bliss. You're basically using it like a drug, which only delays the problem. The other way is to use it as a curative, like real medicine. This is where you actually investigate your suffering, you use concentration to gain real insight. That's what gets to the root cause and actually neutralizes the whole pattern. All right, let's zoom way out for a second and put all of this into a much, much larger context. Our final section here is about the sheer scale of this work, and it's going to ask us to completely reevaluate our timeline for personal growth. So the idea here is to adopt a much, much longer timeline. In Buddhist thought, there's this concept called samsara, which is the idea that we've been cycling through these learning loops for countless lifetimes, since time without beginning. When you look at it from that perspective, our current struggles, they're not some new problem. They're just the latest chapter in a very, very long story. And that means this work is, well, it's definitely not a quick fix.
And when you think about that vast cosmic backdrop, this single human lifetime we have right now becomes this astonishingly rare and precious opportunity. It's kind of the perfect middle ground, isn't it? We face just enough suffering to really want to change, but we also have the intelligence and the freedom to actually do something about it.
There's this ancient quote from the Dhammapada that really hammers home just how precious and, difficult this opportunity is. It's a powerful reminder not to waste the incredibly rare chance we have to actually break these cycles and make some real progress.
So we want to leave you with a really practical question to take away from all this. It's a simple way to kind of audit that numbing phase in your own life. The next time you find yourself mindlessly scrolling or just falling back into some old habit, just pause for a sec and ask yourself with total, brutal honesty, what does this actually feel like right now? Does it truly taste good, or does it just taste like ash? Because acknowledging that lack of any real satisfaction, that's the first step to breaking the spell. And it's how you start the cycle all over again, but this time with a little more wisdom.
Today, we're venturing into maybe the most mysterious territory there is, the human mind. But let's be clear, this isn't some spiritual quest. This is a scientific investigation, following one doctor's methodical and frankly kind of dangerous journey to actually map the strange landscapes that exist inside all of us. And Carl Jung really hit the nail on the head here. This quote is basically the theme for our entire explainer. It's not about looking outward for answers, but turning inward to understand the very mechanics of our own awareness and what it really means to awake. So, what we're looking at here is one medical professional's incredibly disciplined and, yeah, sometimes perilous attempt to chart the internal landscape of the mind. This wasn't just for kicks, this was a serious, rigorous experiment. Let's start right at the beginning with our guide's super rigid scientific worldview. Because really, to get how wild his conclusions are, you have to understand his starting point. So for him, as a medical doctor, the world was pretty black and white. Consciousness? Oh, that's just a side effect of brain chemistry. And the self, that feeling of you being you, well, that was just a fixed biological fact. Case closed. And then everything changed. A single chemical intervention just shattered that entire worldview. And look, this wasn't about feeling good or seeing pretty colors. No, this was a structural revelation. The fact that one tiny molecule could so radically change the very rules of what me felt like proved his whole theory wrong. Subjective awareness wasn't a constant. It was a variable, a dial you could actually turn. Now, it's really important to get this. This wasn't some reckless joyride. The whole thing was governed by a super strict set of rules he imposed on himself. He was a skeptic going in, and he stayed a skeptic all the way through, which honestly makes what he found even more compelling. Okay, so he had this core principle. He called it epistemic caution. Sounds fancy, right? But all it really means is this. Just because an experience feels unbelievably real and profound on the inside, that doesn't make it proof of anything on the outside. It's not evidence of gods, angels, or other dimensions. So what does that look like in practice? Well, he basically treated these mind-blowing experiences like data points. Not data about the universe, but data about the mind. They showed him just how flexible our perception is, how easily it can be rewired. And, this is key, they showed him how fast our brains can attach this huge, inflated sense of meaning to these bizarre new signals. All right, so with that skeptical toolkit in hand, he started to map the terrain. And what he found was that these inner journeys weren't random. They actually progressed through these really distinct stages, from kind of simple sensory stuff all the way to these massive shifts in the very structure of consciousness itself. And he broke it down into 4 clear phases, which kind of acts like a roadmap for this inner world. We're going to walk through them. The borderland, the threshold, infinite space, and finally, the void. So the journey kicks off in what he called the borderland. You know, ordinary objects start to kind of glow or look like they're breathing. His scientific brain kicks in and goes, okay, this is just my pattern recognition software going into hyperdrive. Simple enough. But then you hit the threshold, this point of no return he called the city. And this is a whole different ballgame. It's where the idea of you as a separate person just dissolves. You feel like you're part of this vast, interconnected hive mind. And if you go even deeper, you hit what he called infinite space. I mean, imagine this. No body, no point of view, just your mind, your awareness, adrift in this totally silent, peaceful void. But even then, his caution flags went up. He wondered, is this really transcendence, or is it just my attention narrowing down to a single point? Or maybe it's just a weird kind of amnesia. So that brings us to the final, deepest phase of the journey. The void. And this is where he came face to face with something profound. But it wasn't some god or external being, it was the very core of himself. I mean, think about it. In total silence, when you strip away every distraction, every sense, every single one of your ego's defenses, what's actually left? What he found was something he called the mirror of judgment. And this was a huge realization. All those ancient stories about Judgment Day, he realized it's not some god in the sky with a big book. It's a psychological process. It's your own mind forcing you to look at your own life, your own ethical choices with zero filters, no excuses. There's no one else there, no judge, no jury. It's just you and the mirror. In the end, we weigh ourselves. And the weirdest part? He said that sinking into that brutal, unfiltered honesty actually brought a strange kind of peace. It was the relief of finally not having to pretend anymore. Okay, but this is where the story takes a really sharp turn. Because that disciplined, scientific exploration started to fall apart. It started to slide into what he, as a trained psychiatrist, knew was psychosis.
It made him think of this ancient warning from the Bhagavad Gita about a ritual drink called soma. And the text warns that anyone who relies on shortcuts like that, they only get to visit false heavens. They're just temporary states. They don't lead to any real lasting change.
And that's when the light bulb went on. He realized that this kind of chemical access, as amazing as it can feel, is totally unstable. It's unearned. It might give you a peek through the window of the palace, but then it just leaves you shivering outside in the cold, probably more confused than you were before. And this right here is the absolute core lesson of this entire journey. It's the most important thing to get, the massive difference between a temporary state and a permanent stage.
And when you put them side by side, the difference is just, well, it's night and day. A chemically induced state, it's unstable, it's confusing, it can even be traumatic to try and make sense of, and poof, it's gone when the drug wears off. But a stage, something you cultivate slowly through sober practice, like meditation, that's stable. It's clear, it actually becomes part of who you are, and it permanently changes your baseline for the better.
So here's maybe the best way to think about it. A state is getting a quick, breathtaking glimpse of a palace. A stage is getting the keys, moving in, and learning how to actually live there. So let's wrap this up with a question you can actually use in your own life. When you have some kind of profound insight, what happens next? Does it lead to you being more stable, more present, maybe a little kinder to the people around you? Or does it just give you a feeling of being special, of being superior? The answer to that question, well, that might just be the only map of our inner worlds we ever really need.
All right, let's dive in. Today, we're talking about something that gets misunderstood a lot: personal transformation. And here's the thing, it's not really about finding some blissful peace right away. It's about navigating some really profound and honestly pretty difficult change. So let's start with this quote. It's a heavy one from the Diamond Sutra, and it really sets the stage for everything we're about to unpack. It's basically saying, hey, everything you think is so real and solid, your identity, your goals, the world you've built, what if it's all just a dream, a flash of lightning? That's a heck of a place to start, right?
And that idea, it leads right into a really big, kind of scary question. So what happens? What do you do when that solid ground you've been standing on your whole life suddenly feels like it's not there anymore? When all the things that used to get you out of bed in the morning just feel empty? Well, here's the twist. That moment of crisis, that feeling like you're totally lost, that's not a sign you've done something wrong. Nope. That is the beginning. That's the starting line. And it almost never feels like some peaceful Zen moment. It's usually, well, it's a messy, uncomfortable unraveling.
Which brings us to our first major phase. We're calling it the Great Dislocation. And it's exactly what it sounds like, that strange in-between feeling. You know you can't go back to the way things were, but you have absolutely no idea where you're headed.
Yeah, this really nails that feeling, doesn't it? Being caught right in the middle. The journey inward, it puts you in this weird limbo. You've seen that the old way was an illusion, but you haven't built up the tools or the stability to handle this new reality yet. It's totally necessary, but man, is it unsettling. Okay, so from that dislocation, we move into something even more intense. The next stage is burning away the self. And before you get worried, this isn't about total destruction. Think of it more like a purification by fire. The thing that drives this change, ancient alchemists had a great word for it: heat. And we're not talking about a cozy fireplace. This is friction. It's the intense, grinding conflict between your old habits and your new insights, your old defenses clashing with this new awareness. And that friction, it literally starts to burn away the parts of your personality that just don't fit anymore. So let's look at what this actually feels like, because from the outside, it can look a lot like you're falling apart. You start pulling away from people. That's not necessarily depression, it's you conserving energy for this massive internal work. Your career ambition just vanishes. That's because society's trophies, they just don't mean anything to you anymore. And those wild mood swings, that's the old ego starting to crumble. The key takeaway here is, this isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's a temporary but totally normal part of the process. You know, we hear all these romantic things about ego death, like it's this sudden, blissful explosion of light. But in practice, it feels a lot more humiliating.
Seriously, it's you, consciously, taking a crowbar to all the defenses and hopes and fears you spent your whole life building. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like finally admitting you've been playing a rigged game the whole time. Now, to get a better handle on this total rejection of the normal world, let's look at something from a really unexpected angle. We'll call it the addict's insight, and it kind of reframes an impulse we usually just write off as destructive. Okay, this is a pretty radical thought, so stick with me. What if addiction is actually a rational response to an existence that feels totally hollow? The addict and the spiritual seeker, believe it or not, are starting from the exact same place. They both look at the world and say, this isn't enough. The only difference is the escape route they choose. One path leads to oblivion, the other to transcendence. This brings us to a really crucial fork in the road. Is what you're feeling disillusionment, or is it renunciation? They can look similar, but they're worlds apart. Disillusionment is passive. It's bitter. The story in your head is, the world lied to me. But renunciation, that's an active choice. The story shifts to, okay, this world can't satisfy me, so I'm going to find what can. One ends in cynicism, the other, that's where you find your purpose. Okay, so your inner world is chaos. You're burning away your old self. How do you not just fly off the rails? How do you keep it all from collapsing into just nothing? The answer is an old, simple, and incredibly profound piece of wisdom. Chop wood, fetch water. And look, this isn't just some cute Zen saying you put on a poster. When everything you thought had meaning is falling apart, this becomes your safety protocol. It's your anchor. It is the one thing that keeps you tethered to the real world. So what does chop wood, fetch water actually mean in your life? It's simple, but it's everything. 1. Maintain your basic routines. Get up, shower, do the dishes. 2. Use those boring tasks as a lab. Watch your mind. See how you react to things. This is what stops the whole thing from turning into just neglect. It gives you a stable platform to stand on while you do the hard inner work. You're not doing the laundry because it's spiritually fulfilling. You're doing it because it grounds you. All right, so after you've been through that intense heat and you've found some stability in those daily routines, the journey shifts again. Now we enter a new phase, the gradual return. This is where all that inner work starts to meet the outside world again. In alchemy, they called this multiplication, and let's be super clear, this is not about going back to the person you used to be, not at all. This is about stress testing the person you're becoming. You take the insights you found when you were withdrawn and you bring them back out into the messy real world to see if they actually work. You're testing how durable this new foundation really is. And as you do this, as you integrate, something amazing starts to happen. All that frantic, desperate energy, the stuff that used to power your ambition or maybe your anxiety, it doesn't just vanish. It gets transformed. The struggle is replaced by something else, a quiet, steady, rhythmic purpose. You're not fighting anymore. You're cultivating. This quote from the Upanishads just captures it perfectly. This is the inner state the whole process is aiming for. It's not about some big, flashy achievement. It's about cultivating a deep, internal stillness. And from that stillness, a whole new way of being in the world can finally begin. So we'll leave you with this to think about. When you're in that moment of crisis, what's your real goal? Are you trying to go back? Are you trying to patch up the old you and return to a life that maybe wasn't even working in the first place? Or are you doing the much braver work of building a completely new vessel, one that's strong enough to hold the person you're actually becoming?
Have you ever woken up from a dream that felt, well, more real than reality? A dream so vivid and so emotionally charged, it just sticks with you all day. Of course you have. We all have. And for centuries, we've tried to crack their code, treating them like prophecies or secret messages about our destiny. But what if that's the wrong way to go about it entirely? What if instead of trying to interpret our dreams, we should be learning how to simply observe them? Let's dive into that.
You know, Shakespeare absolutely nailed it. Our lives and our dreams are completely tangled up together. But let's flip the script a little. Instead of asking what our dreams mean, what if we asked what they're for? The idea here is to stop seeing them as coded messages from beyond and start seeing them for what they are, powerful mirrors reflecting our own inner state right back at us.
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll talk about the real danger of dream interpretation. Then, we'll look at what the mind is actually doing on its night shift. After that, we've got some incredible case studies from deep sleep.
And finally, we'll get into a practical guide for how you can start working with your own dreams in a new way.
Okay, let's kick things off with a pretty wild idea. You know that powerful urge you get to find some deep, hidden meaning in every single dream? Well, what if that's actually the biggest trap of all? What if that's the very thing getting in the way of understanding what they're really showing you?
See, here's the risk. When we force our dreams to be prophecies or life instructions, we're basically making them carry a weight they were never, ever designed for. It's like we're trying to use a thermometer to measure distance. We're just using the tool completely wrong, and it can really mess with our own psychological process.
So, this is the big shift right here. On one side, you have the old way, dreams as prophecy. You're hunting for secret instructions, a map to your destiny. But on the other side, we have this new approach, dreams as data. Here, you're not a fortune teller. You're more like a scientist. You just observe the emotions, the recurring themes, and you see what it reflects about your waking mind. It's a huge move from interpretation to pure observation.
So if dreams aren't secret messages, then what are they? To get that, we need to peek behind the curtain and see what the mind is actually up to while we sleep. Seriously, think of it like the mind's night shift, a time for deep cleaning, maintenance, and some serious reorganizing.
To get our heads around this, we can use a model called Alia. Just think of it as the mind's deep sleep mode. It's that state of pure blackout, dreamless sleep. It's like a giant, quiet warehouse where all the noisy, storytelling parts of our brain have finally clocked out. It's the baseline, the quiet foundation.
But then, as we start to drift up out of that deep sleep, something else kicks in, the sankhara. Now, if Alaya is the quiet warehouse, the sankhara are the restless night crew. They grab all the leftover bits and pieces from your day, thoughts, feelings, random memories, and they just start building stuff. Wild, chaotic, beautiful stuff. This is what constructs the crazy narratives we call dreams.
This little map lays it all out pretty clearly. When we're awake, our mind is firing on all cylinders, trying to make sense of the world. In deep sleep, we hit that blackout state, the alia. But it's in that middle ground, that light sleep and REM stage, that's the sweet spot. That's when the night crew, the sankhara, get to work. This is the dream factory, where all the symbolic stuff and emotional processing really happens.
All right, enough theory. This is where it gets really fascinating. We're about to look at 3 incredibly powerful dreams. And you'll see they're not just random noise. They are direct, real-time reflections of some seriously profound psychological shifts.
Okay, first up, a dream called the dissolution. Just imagine this for a second. You're climbing a staircase, something you've probably been climbing your whole life, and then poof, it just dissolves into nothing. You're falling, and your family is way up at the top, out of reach. The emotional punch of that image is just wow.
Now, looking at this as data, it's not some spooky prediction about the family falling apart. No, it's a direct report from inside the dreamer's mind. It was perfectly mirroring a huge realization they were having in their waking life, that the solid self they'd spent their whole life building was, just like that staircase, a fragile construction that could just dissolve. Next up, the ethical test. So the dreamer finds a baby. The immediate, automatic, socially programmed reaction is, okay, find an authority figure, hand the baby over, right? But then there's this pause, a moment of conscious choice. A decision to wait and to figure out the right thing to do for themselves.
This dream is basically like a system log file, showing a critical software update. It's marking a huge shift away from just blindly following the rules, social compliance, to developing a real internal moral compass. The right thing to do is no longer just what you're told, it's what you consciously figure out for yourself.
And for our last one, get ready. It's called the conflict. It starts out normally enough in a hotel lobby, but quickly escalates into this full-on battle with demonic figures. And the dreamer realizes that fighting them one by one isn't working. So, in this incredible moment, they decide the only way to win is to bring the whole entire reality of the dream crashing down.
So again, this isn't a warning about actual demons. It's a powerful symbol of a deep internal purification process, something alchemy calls the albedo. Those demons aren't outside forces. They're just personifications of the dreamer's own internal baggage, their own hindrances. And the dream is showing that sometimes you can't just fight the symptoms. You have to tear down the entire underlying structure of the problem.
Okay, we've gone through the theory, we've seen the case studies. Now, how do we actually use this observational, data-driven approach in our own lives? Let's get into the toolkit.
So we're going to look at two really powerful and practical techniques that this whole approach gives us. One is for actively managing those intense mental states when they pop up, and the other is a specific protocol for how to handle the dreams themselves.
First up is the vortex technique. Think of this as a sort of Control-Alt-Delete for your brain. It's not about analyzing your thoughts. It's a purely mechanical reset. So, when you catch a thought loop, in a dream or during the day, spiraling into obsession or anxiety, you visualize it twisting into a vortex. Twist it tighter and tighter until it just implodes on itself. You're not arguing with the thought, you're just collapsing its structure and breaking the feedback loop.
And here it is, the core practice, the dream handling protocol. It is so simple, but so powerful. Step 1. When you wake up, just observe. What were the images? What were the feelings? Step 2. Record it. Write it down, just the facts, no story, no analysis. Step 3, and this is absolutely crucial, neutralize it. Don't assign it any meaning. Don't decide it means you're a genius or that you're doomed. And step 4, just wait. Let the journal grow, and over time, you can look back and spot the real patterns, not just the random noise.
So what this all leads to is a totally new relationship with our dreams. We start seeing them as quiet company, as shadows and reflections of the real work being done. They can be fascinating, they can be helpful, but they aren't the destination. They're not the journey itself. The real transformation, the real work, that all happens right here, in the light of day, with our conscious awake attention.
And that leaves us with one last thing for you to think about. Start paying attention to the main character in your dreams, that dream I. Does that person feel the same as the I who's listening to me right now? Are they more reactive, more powerful, less inhibited? And what does that nightly shift in who you are reveal about how much of our waking self is just a story we construct, day after day? Something to chew on.